Welcome to the History Unplugged podcast, the unscripted show that celebrates unsung heroes, myth-busts historical lies, and rediscovers the forgotten stories that changed our world. I'm your host, Scott Rank. Animals have been part of war efforts as long as civilizations were big enough to field a cavalry, and this goes back several thousands of years. Other war animals included elephants, and pack animals included donkeys, horses, and camels, and you also had carrier pigeons who would deliver messages. But in World War II, animals started doing new and different things as part of the war effort. For example, you'd have pigeons that would be flown in from England, parachuted into France in their bird cages, and there they would wait for members of the French resistance to attach messages to them so they could fly back to England and deliver them. You had paradogs, dogs that were actually dropped out of airplanes with parachutes on their back, and then would arrive with paratroopers and serve with them as sentries or scouts. So many animals served in World War II that there was actually a medal developed called the Dicken Medal, which was an award an animal can achieve for gallantry and bravery in the field of military conflict. In this episode, I'm speaking with Robin Hutton, who wrote a book about the 55 animals who received this medal in World War II. If you remember, Robin joined us all the way back in the second episode of this podcast to talk about Sergeant Wreckless, a war horse who served in the Korean War to ferry equipment to soldiers under enemy fire and actually achieve the rank of sergeant. And she gives biographies of all these animals. One of them is Winky, the first Dicken recipient, a bird who saved members of a downed plane when she flew 129 miles with oil-clogged wings with an SOS message that helped a rescue team find the crew. There's also Ding, a paradog whose plane was hit by enemy fire on D-Day. He ended up in a tree, and once on the ground still saved lives. Or Chips, a sentry dog for the Roosevelt-Churchill Conference. So Robin knows all about this topic. She's actually working to develop a war animal museum, and she gives a perspective on warfare that you've probably never considered. Hope you enjoyed this discussion with Robin Hutton. Robin, welcome back to the show.
Scott, it is an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you so much for having me back.
Yeah, you were the first guest on the show. You were in episode number 2. So for all the completionists out there who've gone back and listened to the first few episodes, they heard your story of Sergeant Wreckless, the warhorse and celebrity of the Korean War. And you have something that you've accomplished, a distinction. I think you're the only guest I know of who actually got a statue commissioned based on the subject of their book. So how are things going now that the statue is up of Sergeant Wreckless?
Well, Scott, they could not have gone better. You know, right when my book came out, I had dedicated the first statue of Sergeant Wreckless at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. And since then, we have placed a second one at Camp Pendleton, California, at the Marine Corps base there where Wreckless is buried. And that was done in October of 2016. And recently, this last May, we dedicated our third to Wreckless at the Kentucky Horse Park in Lexington, Kentucky. And it's just a stunning monument there. She stands among the greatest horses in the world with Secretariat and Man of War and all these great horses at the International Museum of the Horse. So we're very, very blessed that she is at that museum as well. So it's just been a fun ride, pun intended. And I've just been enjoying everything that Wreckless has brought to my life.
All right. Well, we'll try to work in as many horse puns as we can. Try not to stir up any trouble. Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. This is just the audience is rolling their eyes. I could hear it. We'll talk more about other efforts you're doing with getting statues commissioned based on what you've researched now for your current book. And to get into this discussion of what you've been looking at now, let's go back to before your book opens, which is in World War II, and we're talking about animals that are involved in war efforts, war animals. Your book starts in World War II, but based on what you've looked at in history, how long have animals been involved in war efforts? Is this something that really ramps up in World War II, or is it something that's only given more attention at this time, but it's always been there?
Well, it's interesting because animals, from a little bit of the research I've done, animals have served in war throughout time, especially horses, the birds as homing pigeons used as communications. They have served for a while. The elephants have served, camels, pack animals, that kind of thing. Those animals have served in wartime throughout the span of history and stuff. But war dogs in particular, they have been used they were used before World War II by the Germans and the British in World War One. But in World War II, that was really the first time that America produced a war dog program. Before that time, of course, animals, the dogs, were served as mascots mainly, to shore up the morale for the troops, and that's kind of always been there. But in World War II, that is absolutely the very first time that America stepped up and decided that the dogs needed to play a role in war. And what's interesting about that is in World War II, when the bombing of Pearl Harbor took place on December 7th, 1941, a poodle breeder, which is, I find, just really kind of fun, because I can't imagine poodles going over to fight the Japanese. But they did guard our munitions plants and stuff. But a poodle breeder named Arlene Erlanger decided that she was very big in the dog world with the American Kennel Association and just all of these amazing dog fanciers, Westminster Kennel Club and stuff like that. She decided that she was going to put together with her dog friends an organization called Dogs for Defense. And Dogs for Defense got started in January, February 1942. And they made a plea to America to donate your personal dogs, your pets, to the war dog cause. And they would be trained as sentry dogs, guard dogs, patrol dogs, messenger dogs, all of these different functions these dogs would be trained to do. And Scott, it was just amazing. The patriotism of people at that time. They are better patriots than me, because there's no way that you're going to take my Misty or my Gracie to war. I'm sorry. She needs to be here on my home front, So, but America answered the call, and 40,000 dogs were donated originally to the effort. Now, of course, half of them were too old, not the right size. They had medical issues and things. But 20,000 made the original cut. And then as they whittled down as to which breeds were better for training and stuff, 10,425 dogs were trained to serve with the Army and the Coast Guard during the war. And then the Marine Corps had their own training program with Doberman Pinschers and basically German Shepherds or Belgian Malinois, those kind of dogs. They had over 1,300 dogs in their war dog program during World War II. So it was an amazing, amazing time. And the great thing about that was the people donated their pets, and those that survived the war, most of them came home to their owners. And if the owners didn't want them, then they found homes for these dogs, which is what they do now, but is not what they did with Korea and Vietnam. So that was a very difficult time. But it's amazing to see how the military working dog program has since expanded to today's amazing program. But, as I said, warbirds and stuff, they served in wars previously, but they're not used anymore. The pigeons really are not used because we have so many other ways of communication and everything. But those birds were instrumental in getting messages through, especially when everything else had been lost and they weren't able to walk, their communication lines had been cut or whatever. The warbirds really were something else. So it's just an amazing time when these animals were serving during World War II.
You mentioned a poodle breeder, and I have to ask about this because I get German Shepherds. You see police officers today use them as drug dogs.
Yes.
They have excellent sense of smell, or a bloodhound. But poodles, what would poodles be used for in a war effort, and why?
You know, the poodles, it was amazing. They were very, very smart dogs. And they had just a great sense of smell. They weren't, some of them weren't that high strung, but they were amazingly dedicated animals. And they were trained for sentry dogs. And they would parole. They weren't attack dogs or anything like that, but they would parole the areas or the beaches or things like that, just to kind of as a security force. And then it came that their hair was a little bit, they were a little bit more high maintenance to take care of. And so they were chopped in the final whittling down. When the war first started, there were like 34 breeds they were looking at. And then it whittled down to 18, and then ultimately 7 breeds were found to be the best, and those were the German Shepherds, the Belgian Malinois, the Husky for up in the Greenland and Alaska, and everything, the cold weather, and the Collie, Farm Collie was a good one, Doberman Pinscher, as I said. So those are the dogs that were the ones that they finally focused in on. And today, the German Shepherd, the Belgian Malinois, those are the ones that are used mostly, and labs. I was just at the Marine Corps down at Camp Pendleton and their working dog program, and they have labs that are great drug sniffing dogs and everything. So it's just amazing how these dogs are used.
Do you get a sense of why it's World War II when the use of animals to this degree really ramps up? Because, people have known forever that dogs have excellent hearing or sense of smell. They've been used for hunting since time immemorial. They would be effective in sniffing out any sort of sneak attacks or whatever. So is there something about World War II that makes animals more useful in this particular war to the point that there's a specific program for them? Is it because it's fought in so many different locations? Is it because there's more machines involved or something else?
I think, and from the research that I did, a couple of things came together. I think people really realized the use of what dogs could do with in war and their role. It made sense, to like the Brits. They had a working dog program in World War I, and actually, the guy that wrote the book on that program, his manual was used in the beginning of our war dog program. And actually, Great Britain sent over some of their trainers of their working war dog school to come over and help with our Army setting up the program, because they saw the need for dogs in World War I. So I think America, their eyes were just opened, to this. Horses had been used in war quite a bit before World War II. They were really, really used in World War I, of course, by everybody, and Civil War with us too. You really get to see the role of horses, either used as transport or as pack animals and stuff. But in World War II, with the mechanization of, with trucks and jeeps and everything like that, the horse really wasn't used that much. As a matter of fact, most of the horses used we got over there, but the mule became more important in World War II than the horse. And while the horses were used on the home front with the Coast Guard to patrol our shores and coastlines and stuff, that pretty much was their role. It was very hard to ship horses overseas just for the space and the feed and everything. So we got the horses that we had over there. But I just think there was more of an awareness. And then with the birds, people, we had always used those, but they really kind of came into play big time in World War II. And I also think people's awareness of them. World War II was very unique because at the time in 1943, The Brits, there was a organization called the People's Dispensary for Sick Animals, and this organization just celebrated its 100-year anniversary.